Okay, so I've started the process of sort of getting the last sort of few pages of this book sort of adhered and ready to be sewn into the loom. And I've actually learned a really important lesson in this process. Now, my assumption going into this had been that we would be dealing with a situation not unlike when we sewed the binding of this little guy, the Granville Sharps little book. And if you recall, when we did this work, what we were able to do was basically take advantage of the fact that there were gatherings. In other words, by a gathering, I mean there were groups, and I'll just show you one here, for example. There were groups of maybe 16 pages or 24 pages that were all folded around a common center. You can just see it here at the back, you know. So basically all these pages were nested in one group, which actually sort of made it really easy for us, because what we could do is put a bit of thread down the center of that group, and basically, you know, that thread, you know, left us feeling secure. I can probably find it if I go sort of looking here deeply. You can probably find the thread that we sewed in. I don't want to put too much strain on the book, but you know, somewhere deep in here, there will be one thread that holds in place all of the pages that are in this group, and that's called a gathering. So my assumption had been that basically it was going to be the same story for this book, but on a much bigger scale. No. As I started to look more closely at these groups of pages, and this particular group I've got here is from page 309 through to 340, so this is 32 pages, so 16 individual leaves. As I started to look close into the edge, let me just refocus the camera here, hopefully we can zoom in. You can probably just about make out, let's see if it'll zoom a little bit, there we go. You can probably just about make out that this is not one gathering. What you have here basically are lots of individual folded pieces of paper, and what this is telling me is that this book is actually compiled of sheets of printed paper that are probably, you know, that are twice the size of what we're looking at here, that have just been folded in the middle. And looking closely, the vast majority of these folds actually don't have thread down the middle. They're simply glued. So the question is, well, why was this in the, you know, why did this book have all these lovely gatherings and this book not? Part of it is, this is a much more recent book. This is 1699, whereas this is the middle of the 17th century, so it's earlier. But the other thing is, in simple terms, printing presses were only of a certain size, and it was very easy to put, you know, 24 pages of text on one, you know, double-sided piece of paper when the book's only this big. For a book this big, the press just simply wasn't big enough to do that. So, you know, you'd be lucky to get 2 pages on one sheet. So as a result, you don't get this sort of nesting. Instead, you have individual pieces of paper that were folded over and glued together. And that's the lesson. You know, the original printers were constrained by the size of the printing press. This doesn't really apply, obviously, in modern book printing, but the original printing presses could only handle pieces of paper of a certain size. And that meant that they couldn't be gathered then when they were sewn in to form a text block. So what does that mean for us? Well, it makes things a little bit more complicated, because this edge, this inner edge, although there are some bits and pieces of thread here and there that we used in raised bands, the vast majority of the sort of structure here is glue, just glue. It's simply the pages were stuck together with some kind of basic, probably a sort of a grain-based glue, maybe an animal glue, more likely a grain-based glue, and stuck together, and then the leather and spine were stuck directly on the back, and that was it. And that's in effect what we're dealing with here, with this sort of crumbliness that's going on. So that leaves us with a sort of a bit of difficulty here in terms of, well, how can I give this back some structure and actually sew this in and, put this text block back together again? And the method I've come up with, and it would be great to actually, for people, if this is completely wrong, please do mention in the comments, no, you need to do it this way. And that'll be really helpful. But I'll take you through what I'm doing here, and we'll see where it takes us. So the first thing to say is this paper itself is crumbly along this edge. The glue itself is also failing. The thread, such as it still exists, was also very, very vulnerable. What my approach is to put a bead of glue along this top edge. And what we're going to do is give this, we're going to use basically physics. We're going to use capillary action to actually allow this glue to come to our aid. So here we go. Again, we're just using Elmer's school glue. And what I'm going to do is put a bead, and I'm going to try and keep this in shot as I work. My aim here is not to have the glue run down the side. What I want it to do is just by literally surface tension, I guess, to just sit there on top as a bead. And what will happen, obviously this glue has a high water content. What will happen is the paper will start to absorb the water from the glue, and that'll draw the glue down in between the pages, maybe only by 1/16 of an inch or so. But what will happen is this glue will actually start to advance down between those pages. And as that happens, the paper will soften and the glue will actually start to, the paper will slowly start to sort of go back to I guess a papier-mâché, if you like. And we start to get away from being individual brittle pieces of paper towards, being a rather sort of gummy sort of single whole that'll then dry. So you see there, I've got this bead. And I'm just going to leave that for a minute. And while that's working, what I'm going to do here is just off camera shot. I'm trimming a piece of reasonably contemporary paper that's the same size, because we're going to use that to create a external piece of paper, so that will fold over. So what I'm going to do now is, you'll probably just see it there at the bottom, I'm just going to put another bead of glue on this bit of paper here that I've just cut. Sorry, this is out of shot, but you're not missing much. I'm just putting a bit of glue here on a bead of paper. Bit of paper here. Now, what I'm going to do is, first thing I'm going to do is I don't want that escaping down the page. So I'm just going to pull that up. Here. Make sure there's none escaping down the back either. There we go, just let Just let capillary action do its thing. As the paper softens. Now what I'm going to do is get this little strip of paper that I've created here and just put this on the top. Now this is a very thin piece of paper. It'll absorb the glue quite quickly and it'll go very sort of wet and weak, but that's okay. What we're going to do is fold it over neatly in place. Each time you fold it, the sort of glue soaks into the paper a little bit more, softens the paper. The paper is more willing then to yield and stay where you put it. Like so. Now, at this point, this has no strength whatsoever. But the idea is that as this glue, as this glue dries and sets, several things are going to happen. The first thing is that these pages in here that are sort of a little bit separated and brittle at the moment will be soft, then they'll bind, then they'll dry, and they'll become a single tougher whole, basically. The other thing that's going to happen is this little strip of paper that I put on the outside that's now sort of very weak because it's wet and got lots of glue in it will actually become quite a bit stronger again as it dries out, and it'll become a medium through which we'll be able to pass a needle and actually sew this into a sort of assembled text block in exactly the same way as if it were a gathering. Now, I freely admit you're probably thinking, you know what, yeah, but there are going to be pages in here that are potentially loose. Well, that could happen. I hope not, because the glue will be working its way down between the pages, again, by capillary action. So there'll be glue sort of, advancing 1/8 of an inch or so down there inside. And that'll be helping to bind the pages together. But as we sort of, when this is fully dried, we'll be able to open it up and have a look inside. And if it sort of cracks open and there's an obvious sort of weakness, we can actually put a very quick bead of glue inside, close it up again, and, or even another little strip of paper inside and close it up again and so on. And honestly, that's the way we have to work through this entire book to reassemble this, because the paper in many places is really quite brittle. But that's going to be kind of the method. So we're going to end up with a whole bunch of, in effect, not true gatherings, but maybe pseudo gatherings that we've kind of manufactured by doing this. And I think they'll be reasonably robust. And then once we've done that and we've sewn these into the loom, such that we have a text block, we're actually going to be able to then apply a whole load more glue and fabric at the back, and that glue itself will again soak through. So, in effect, we're going to have a few goes at this to make sure that there's sufficient glue in place to really hold these pages and, make sure there aren't any sort of pages sort of coming loose where we don't want them. But anyway, this is now going to dry. That'll settle overnight, and I'll do a bunch of others as well. We'll leave them drying overnight, and then tomorrow we'll look at how robust this is when it's dried, and hopefully these pages will have stuck together and be in a more robust situation.